A former Navy SEAL had spent years hiding from the world inside a snow-covered cabin at the edge of the Maine woods. But one winter morning, his sister came to his cabin, pulled him into her car, and drove him to a German Shepherd kennel he never wanted to visit. When they arrived at Eldon Pratt's kennel, Callum froze. The place was far more crowded than he had expected. The brother and sister walked past rows of German Shepherds, young, strong, glossy-coated dogs standing proudly behind the gates. But at the very end of the kennel row, Callum saw an old German Shepherd lying near the wooden wall. Thin, rough-coated, silver, muzzled, one ear bent down, silent and abandoned. Callum asked how much Eldon had paid for the dog, and Eldon hesitated before saying, $100, just a transfer fee. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. Share your thoughts after the story. And please like and subscribe to help us reach 1,000 subscribers so we can keep creating more heartfelt stories. Winter had laid its white hand over Cedar Hollow, Maine, gently enough to make the town look innocent. Snow rested on the roofs like sifted flour. The pine trees stood black and green against a pale morning sky, their branches bowed beneath frost. From a distance, the small cabins scattered along the northern road looked warm, almost cheerful, each chimney lifting a thin gray prayer into the cold air. But the cabin at the edge of the woods did not look cheerful. It looked guarded. Callum Mercer lived there alone, where the last gravel road narrowed into a trail, and the forest began speaking in old wooden sounds. The cabin was small, built of dark logs weathered by wind, with a porch that sagged slightly on the left, and a stack of split firewood arranged with military precision along the wall. Smoke rose from the chimney, but even that seemed disciplined, as if Callum had taught the fire not to make too much noise. Callum, at 58, was the kind of man Winter did not easily soften. He stood about 6 feet tall, broad through the shoulders, solid in the way of men shaped by hardship rather than comfort. His face was square and stern, with a jaw darkened by neatly trimmed stubble and cheekbones, cut hard by years of wind, salt, and sleepless nights. His skin was sun-browned, despite the northern cold, and his gray-blue eyes carried a depth that made strangers lower their voices without knowing why. His short, dark brown hair was swept back unevenly, as if the snow wind had run its fingers through it, and left a few silver marks at the temples. He wore the same faded green military jacket most days, the fabric worn pale at the shoulders, the cuffs frayed, the collar bent from years of use. Beneath it, he wore a brown-gray flannel shirt, dark jeans, old brown boots, and a military watch with a scratched face that he never replaced. Though it no longer glowed at night, he lived by routine, because routine did not ask questions. Before dawn, he woke. He checked the locks. He fed the stove. He drank black coffee standing beside the kitchen window, never sitting with his back to the door. He split wood even when the pile was already high enough. He repaired loose hinges that did not yet need repairing. He folded his blanket so tightly it could have passed inspection in a barracks no one remembered. The cabin was clean, but cold in a way fire could not fix. There were no photographs on the mantel, no radio murmuring in the background, no second chair pulled close to the table. Everything in the house had a place, and every place seemed chosen by a man who had once believed that order could keep grief from entering. It had not. That morning, Callum was tightening a screw on a cabinet handle that had never truly been loose when he heard tires crunch over snow outside. He did not turn quickly. He never turned quickly, unless danger required it. He only set the screwdriver down, looked toward the window, and saw a red scarf moving through the white yard, like a small flame refusing to die. Willa Mercer had arrived. Willa, 51, was Callum's younger sister, and the only person in Cedar Hollow stubborn enough to treat his silence as a locked door rather than a warning sign. She was a small woman, around 5'4", with a heart-shaped face, fair skin pinkened by cold, and chestnut, brown hair streaked with silver, usually tied in a loose knot that never survived the wind. Her green eyes were bright, quick, and full of the dangerous mercy of people who loved too long to be frightened away. She wore a cream wool coat, brown winter trousers, soft boots, and the red scarf she claimed made her visible to both passing cars and emotionally unavailable brothers. In one hand she carried a tin of waffles, in the other, a paper bag that smelled of cinnamon. Callum opened the door before she knocked. "That's unsettling," Willa said, stepping inside. "Do you just sense baked goods now?" "I heard the car. You hear a mouse regret a decision 3 houses away." Callum took the tin from her without smiling. Morning, Willa. It is despite your best efforts. She looked around the cabin as she always did, taking in the folded blanket, the clean table, the silent stove, the empty second chair. Her expression softened, but only for a second. Willa had learned long ago not to pity him where he could see it. Pity made Callum retreat. Humor, on the other hand, annoyed him into staying alive. If silence could freeze, she said, unwrapping her scarf, this place would be a national monument. The corner of Callum's mouth moved, for Willa. That was practically a parade. She set the waffles on the table and watched him pour coffee into 2 mugs, though she knew he would not sit unless she did first. He moved with the controlled economy of a man who had spent too many years saving strength for the worst possible moment. Even here, in his own kitchen, he seemed ready to step between the world and an unseen threat. Willa accepted the mug and warmed both hands around it. I need you to come with me today, she said. No, you didn't ask where. I've known you my whole life. That should make you more trusting. It made me accurate. She gave him a look over the rim of her cup. There's a German Shepherd kennel outside town. Eldon Pratt's place. I want you to come look. Callum's face did not change, but something behind his eyes closed. No, you said that already, and it improved with repetition. Willa set the cup down. The humor remained in her face, but now it stood guard over something more fragile. Callum, you need company. I have trees. Trees don't care if you eat dinner. That's why we get along. She glanced toward the empty room, toward the chair by the stove where he spent most evenings pretending the wind was not the only voice he heard. A dog might help. A dog needs more than this. A dog needs food, shelter, patience. A dog needs a man who doesn't wake up at 3 in the morning with his hands shaking. The words came out flat, almost bored. But Willa heard the wound beneath them. She had been hearing it for years in the spaces between his sentences. She did not reach for him. Callum did not like being touched when the truth was too close. Instead, she said quietly, maybe you don't need a perfect dog. Maybe you need one quiet enough to sit beside you without asking what happened. The stove snapped softly. Outside, snow slid from a pine branch and fell with a hush. Callum looked away first. That should have ended it. With most people, it would have. But Willa Mercer had once been 8 years old with scraped knees, chasing her older brother across a frozen creek because he had told her she was too little to follow. She had been following him ever since, sometimes with laughter, sometimes with prayer, sometimes with a stubbornness that looked suspiciously like love wearing boots. We're only looking, she said. No promises, no decisions. If it's too much, we leave. I don't do crowds, I know. I don't do small talk. That has been reported by several counties. I don't need saving. Willa's expression changed then, just enough to quiet the room. I know that too. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then she added, brighter, but if you refuse, I'll come back tomorrow with more waffles and sing hymns on your porch until the entire forest accepts Jesus just to make me stop. Callum stared at her. You wouldn't. I absolutely would, loudly, off-key with feeling. A long breath left him through his nose. 10 minutes later, he was in the passenger seat of Willa's old Subaru, wearing the faded green jacket and the expression of a man being transported against his better judgment toward either healing or humiliation, possibly both. The road to Eldon Pratt's kennel ran through the brighter side of winter. Sunlight lay over the fields in cold sheets of gold. Red barns stood half, buried in snow. Fence posts made dark stitches across the white land. A few crows moved over the sky like bits of burned paper. Willa talked most of the way. She spoke about the school roof leaking again, about Mrs. Hanley's pie contest scandal, about a boy in town who had named his pet rabbit General Fluffington and was now drunk with power. Callum listened without appearing to. His eyes moved from mirror to road, road to tree line to the vehicles behind them. Old habits did not retire. They only learned to wear civilian clothes. The closer they got to the kennel, the tighter his chest became. By the time Willa turned into the long driveway, Callum already knew there would be too many people. Cars lined the snowy lot. Families stood near the entrance in bright winter coats. Children laughed. Dogs barked from somewhere behind the main building. The sound struck Callum in layers. Voices, engines, chains, boots on packed snow, a gate clanging shut. For a second, he was not in Maine. He was in too much noise. His hand went to the face of his old watch. Willa noticed. she always noticed. But instead of asking if he was all right, which would have made him lie, she stepped beside him and looked toward the kennel. "We go slow," she said. Callum nodded once. The kennel belonged to Eldon Pratt, though they did not meet him at once. The place was neat enough from the outside. A long wooden building painted barn red, a fenced exercise yard, a sign shaped like a shepherd's head. But the air carried the mixed smell of straw, cold metal, dog food, and wet fur. It was not cruel. Not exactly. But it was a place where living things waited to be chosen, and Callum had never liked rooms where worth had to perform inside. Rows of German shepherds stood behind clean wire gates. Young dogs, strong dogs, handsome dogs, black and tan coats shone under the pale winter light. Ears stood sharp, tails moved. Buyers gathered around the best. Looking animals, speaking of bloodlines, guarding instincts, hips, training potential. Willa stopped at one kennel where a young male German shepherd stood alert. Golden coat bright, black saddle smooth as polished leather. His eyes were lively, his body strong, his tail sweeping confidently. "He's beautiful," Willa said. "He is. He'd be easy." Callum looked at the dog. The dog looked back with the open brightness of a creature who still believed the world intended kindness. Callum felt something twist in him. "Easy for who?" he asked. Willa did not answer. They kept walking. At the far end of the kennel, where the light thinned and the air grew quieter, Callum saw the dog no one else was looking at. The German shepherd lay near the back wall as though he had been placed there and forgotten by time itself. He was old, maybe 9, with a yellow and black coat dulled by neglect. The black across his back looked like an old saddle worn thin from many hard miles, while the gold along his sides had faded toward rust. His muzzle was white with age, and one ear stood upright, while the other bent slightly at the tip, giving him the strange dignity of a battered flag still refusing to fall. His body was too lean, hips sharp beneath the fur, but his eyes were awake, amber steady and unbearably calm. He did not bark. He did not whine. He did not press his nose to the gate. He simply watched Callum. A man passing behind them laughed under his breath. He was broad, red-faced, and bundled in a brown coat, the kind of man who mistook volume for confidence. That one. Looks like he should be telling war stories by a stove, not guarding anything. A woman beside him chuckled and moved on. Willa looked at the old dog and worry crossed her face before kindness could hide it. "Callum," she said softly. "He looks sick." "I know. He looks old." "I know, and sad." Callum's voice lowered. "No," Willa turned to him. "He doesn't look sad," Callum said. "He looks finished waiting." The words unsettled even him. Then the old shepherd did something small. He lifted his head. Not much, only an inch or two. But the movement was deliberate, as if some invisible command had passed through the cold air between them. His amber eyes fixed on Callum's right hand, the hand resting near the seam of his jacket, fingers slightly open. Callum froze. He had not realized he was doing it. A low, open-palmed signal, old as another life. A gesture meant to say, "No threat, hold position, breathe." The dog recognized it. For one heartbeat, the kennel noise faded. The barking, the laughter, the buyers, the clatter of gates. All of it moved far away, as though snow had fallen over the world and left only a man and an old dog staring across a wire door. Callum felt the strange sensation of being seen by something that had no interest in his stories, his medals, his wounds, or the name people gave to his service. The dog saw the part of him that was still standing watch, and Callum, against every reasonable instinct he had left, saw it too. He stepped closer. The other dogs barked or jumped or backed away. The old shepherd did none of those things. He remained still, but his breathing changed. Slow, measured, waiting. Callum lowered himself carefully, not directly in front of the gate, not looming. He turned one shoulder aside, making his body smaller, less like a threat. Then he raised his hand again. Palm low, fingers loose. The dog blinked once. Then, with the painful dignity of an old king rising from a cold throne, he pushed himself upright. Willa stopped breathing. Callum's throat tightened. There were many things he could have said. Something practical, something dismissive, something to protect himself from the absurd tenderness gathering in his chest. Instead, he looked at the dog, then at Willa, and spoke so quietly she almost missed it. "Get the owner." Willa stared at him. "Callum, please." That word did what force never could. Willa nodded and turned back toward the front office. Callum remained by the gate. The old German shepherd stood on the other side, thin and silent, one ear proud and one bent, amber eyes holding steady. Callum had arrived at the kennel as a man dragged there by his sister's love, but standing before that forgotten dog, he felt something older than choice move through him, like a buried road under snow, waiting for one footstep to remember it existed. He had not come looking for a mission, yet somehow, from the far end of a cold kennel, one had lifted its head and looked directly at him. Willa returned with the kennel owner before Callum had moved from the old shepherd's gate. The man came down the aisle with the heavy-footed pace of someone who had spent more of his life among feed sacks and frozen water troughs than among gentle conversations. Eldon Pratt was 63, broad through the middle, with rounded shoulders, a thick neck, and hands cracked from cold and disinfectant. His face was rough and red from years of winter wind, his pale blue eyes quick, but not warm, and a thin gray. Blonde mustache sat above a mouth used to measuring every answer before it cost him something. He wore a brown canvas coat stained at the elbows, a blue-gray flannel shirt, faded jeans, black rubber boots, and an old cap with the kennel logo worn almost blank. He was not cruel in the theatrical way of villains. That would have been easier to hate. Eldon was worse in a quieter, more ordinary way. He had learned to see dogs by what they could bring in, what they could be trained to do, and how fast someone would pay for them. Willa walked beside him with her arms folded, her red scarf bright against the dull kennel air. She looked at Callum, then at the old German shepherd, and Callum saw worry pass over her face again. "This the one?" Eldon asked, nodding toward the back of the run. Callum did not look away from the dog. "What's his name?" "Briggs," Eldon said. "Least, that's what was on the old collar when I got him." The dog's ears shifted at the sound of the name, but he did not rise again. He had lowered himself after that small, strange moment at the gate, lying with his front paws stretched out, amber eyes steady, one ear proud, the other bent at the tip like a flag that had outlived too many storms. Age, maybe 9. Maybe a little more hard to say when they come in rough. Willa drew a small breath. 9 was not ancient for every dog, but in a working German shepherd with thin hips, a silvered muzzle and tired joints. It sounded like a number already standing near the edge of goodbye. Callum heard the breath but did not answer it. Eldon hooked his thumbs into his coat pockets. "I'll be straight with you. He's not a family dog. Not the way most folks mean. Doesn't play nice for buyers. Doesn't sit when told. Doesn't come running for treats. Eats like he suspects the food of plotting against him." A man nearby laughed. He was a tall buyer in a dark parka, perhaps 40. With a square red face and the loud confidence of someone who liked being overheard. His wife, a narrow woman with a white knit hat and sharp eyes, stood beside him holding a leash they had not yet bought. The man leaned closer to the gate and shook his head. "That old thing," he said. "You'd spend more on the vet than the dog's worth." His wife gave a small laugh, embarrassed, but not enough to stop him. Callum did not turn. Willa did. Her green eyes narrowed. Eldon lifted one hand. Half apology, half agreement. "He's not wrong about the vet part. Dog's underweight. Hips might be stiff. Coat's a mess. I got him from a fellow up near Ashford who said Briggs had some kind of winter. Work training years back. Weather routes. Mountain maintenance. Something like that. But there's no clean paperwork. No final handler listed. Nothing I can sell as proof." Callum's eyes moved to the old collar around Briggs's neck. It was brown leather, cracked, too loose now. A small, dull metal tag hung under his throat, worn so smooth that whatever number had once been stamped into it had nearly disappeared. "Winter work training?" Willa asked. Eldon shrugged. "That's what I was told. Could be true. Could be someone dressing up a hard-luck dog to make him sound useful around here. Every old shepherd has a legend if you ask the right liar." The buyer in the parka chuckled again. Callum finally looked at Eldon. "Why is he at the end?" Eldon glanced down the aisle. "Because people don't like starting their visit with something sad." The answer landed in Callum's chest with a dull weight, not because it surprised him, but because it did not. The world was full of corners where people placed what made them uncomfortable. Willa touched Callum's sleeve. "Callum," she said softly, "we should think about this." "I am." "No, I mean really think. He may need medication, he may not settle. He may not even want a home." The old shepherd's gaze shifted toward her then. Not sharply, not angrily, only enough to make Willa stop speaking for a moment. Her face changed. She had meant kindness, yet in the silence that followed, even she seemed to hear how easily kindness could dress itself as refusal. Eldon cleared his throat. If you want one that'll be easier, I've got a 2-year-old male up front. Good hips, clean drive, handsome coat, costs more, but he'll make a better first impression. I'm not buying an impression, Callum said. The aisle quieted. Eldon studied him more closely. You sure you know what you're doing? No. That answer seemed to confuse everyone except Willa. Callum reached into the inside pocket of his faded green military jacket and pulled out a worn leather billfold. He counted the money without drama, without asking for a discount, without pretending this was wise. What did you pay for him? He asked. Eldon's mouth tightened. He glanced toward the other buyers, then back at Callum. 100 transfer fee. Mostly, I thought I could work with him. And he doesn't work for me. Callum held out a $100 bill. Willa closed her eyes for half a second. Callum, he looked at her then, and there was no defiance in his face, only a quiet sorrow she knew too well. I'm not proving anything, he said. Maybe trouble still deserves somewhere warm to sleep. Willa's expression softened, but fear remained. She was not afraid of Briggs. She was afraid of watching her brother open a door and get hurt by what came through. Eldon took the bill slowly, as if accepting it made him less certain of the bargain. I'll draw up the transfer. The paperwork happened at a small counter near the front office. Eldon's assistant, a thin teenage boy with sandy hair and nervous hands, slid a form across the desk, without looking directly at Callum. Willa read every line, because someone in the Mercer family had to pretend to be sensible. Callum signed where he was told. His handwriting was firm, spare, and almost too neat. When it was done, Eldon folded the paper and tucked it into an envelope. You want me to crate him? He asked. I've got a transport cage. Might take 2 men. No, Callum said. Eldon gave a short laugh. He hasn't walked out for me once. Not without a lead and a fight. Then don't fight him. The kennel owner's smile thinned. The few buyers still nearby slowed as Callum returned to the last run. The red-faced man lingered near the aisle, not wanting to miss the chance to see dignity become foolishness. Willa stood a step behind her brother, arms wrapped around herself, caught between alarm and faith. Callum did not reach for the latch at once. He waited. Briggs watched him. The old shepherd's ribs moved beneath his dull coat. The kennel air smelled of straw, metal, fear, soap, and winter. Somewhere behind them, a younger dog barked 3 bright, eager notes. Briggs did not answer. Callum lowered his voice. You can stay there, he said, or you can come see if the world has one decent room left in it. Eldon frowned. He won't understand that. No, Callum said, but I do. He opened the latch. The gate swung inward with a soft metallic complaint. Briggs did not move. For one terrible second, Willa thought her brother's heart had stepped forward faster than the dog could follow. She could almost see the old wound preparing itself inside Callum. The quiet expectation that hope, when offered, would remain where it was and look away. Then Briggs shifted, not toward freedom, not toward food, not toward the open aisle. He lowered his nose to the threshold and sniffed the place where the kennel ended. The movement was so careful it felt ceremonial. One paw came forward, then stopped. His nails touched the concrete outside the run. His shoulders trembled, not from fear alone, but from the cost of choosing. This was not a young dog bounding into a new life. This was an old soldier crossing a border. Eldon's face changed. The red-faced buyer stopped smiling. Briggs stepped out. He did not come close enough to be touched. He did not press against Callum's leg. He kept a measured distance, body slightly angled, amber eyes flicking once to Willa, once to Eldon, once toward the open door at the front of the building. He saw everything, counted everything. Then he moved to Callum's left side, not perfectly, not like a parade. His hip was stiff, and one step dragged half an inch behind the other, but the position was unmistakable, near enough to follow, far enough to remain ready. Callum felt something inside him go very still. Eldon stared at the dog as if a locked drawer had opened by itself. Well, Willa whispered, the buyer in the parka muttered. Lucky guess. Briggs turned his head toward the man. He did not growl. He only looked at him. The man found sudden interest in another row of kennels. Willa made a sound that might have been a laugh if it had not trembled. Callum looked down at Briggs. "All right," he said quietly. "Let's go home." The word home did not transform the dog. Briggs remained guarded, thin, old, and uncertain. But the bent ear flicked once, and his gaze returned to Callum with a gravity that made the whole kennel feel smaller. They walked out together. Outside, the cold sunlight struck Briggs's coat and revealed what the dull kennel light had hidden. Beneath the neglect, his coloring was beautiful in a weathered way. Black across the back like an old saddle, deep gold along the ribs, pale cream at the chest, and that small arrow-shaped streak of lighter fur running down from his brow toward the bridge of his nose. Snowflakes settled on his silver muzzle and did not melt. Willa saw it then, the strange nobility under the ruin. "He isn't ugly," she said softly. Callum kept walking. "No, he's just tired." Callum looked at her. "So are a lot of things people throw away." At the Subaru, he opened the rear door. Willa had already spread a thick blanket across the seat. Though she had insisted they were only looking, Callum noticed but did not mention it. Sisters, like saints and smugglers, often prepared for outcomes they denied expecting. Briggs stopped at the open door. The smell of the car made him uneasy. His body stiffened. His eyes moved over the seat, the floor, the windows, the narrow space. A vehicle was a promise and a trap, depending on who closed the door. Callum did not lift him. He did not tug the lead Eldon had clipped loosely to the collar. He placed one hand on the top of the doorframe, then stepped back, giving Briggs a clear line of choice. "No one's putting you in a box," he said. The old dog stood there for a long moment. Then he climbed in. It was not graceful. His back leg slipped once, and Willa almost reached to help. But Callum raised one finger. "Wait." Briggs caught himself, gathered what strength remained, and pulled his body onto the blanket. Once inside, he turned carefully and lay facing the rear window, where he could see the kennel disappearing before it had disappeared. Eldon stood near the office door, cap in both hands. Now he looked smaller than he had in the aisle. For the first time, he seemed less like a man who had sold a dog, and more like a man who had failed to recognize a soul passing through his hands. The drive back to the cabin was quiet. Willa did not fill the car with chatter this time. She drove slowly over the snow-packed road, glancing now and then into the mirror. Briggs did not sleep. He sat upright for most of the ride, braced but calm, watching the world slide past, white fields, dark fences, red barns, pines lifting black arms into the pale sky. Callum sat in the passenger seat, one hand resting loosely on his knee. He did not turn around often. He knew the difference between checking and hovering. But once, when the road curved and sunlight flashed across the rear window, he saw Briggs's reflection looking back at him. Not trusting, not yet, but present at the cabin. Willa helped carry in a bag of food, 2 metal bowls, and a folded blanket. She placed the bowls near the stove, but not too close, remembering what Callum had said about space without being told twice. Briggs entered slowly behind Callum. His paws touched the wooden floor one at a time. He paused at the threshold, smelling pine smoke, leather, coffee, old wool, and one man's long loneliness. He did not eat. He did not drink. He walked to a place near the door where he could see the room, the window, and Callum at the same time. Then he lowered himself onto the floor with a tired breath. Willa stood by the table looking at him. "He's going to take time," she said. "So will I." That answer sat between them, plain and honest. Willa picked up her gloves. At the door, she looked back at her brother, then at the old dog lying like a sentry in a house that had never had one before. "Don't try to fix him in one day," she said. Callum lowered himself into the chair by the stove. He kept both hands visible, resting open on his knees. Briggs's amber eyes followed the movement, but he did not rise. "I'm not going to fix him," Callum said. "I'm going to let him learn the door doesn't always mean running." Willa's eyes shone, but she smiled before tears could win. "That might be the wisest thing you've said since 1998. Go home, Willa. There he is." She left laughing softly, though the sound broke a little at the end. Her Subaru rolled away down the snowy track, red taillights fading between the pines. Inside the cabin, the fire shifted, the wind moved along the roof. Callum sat in the chair, still as stone, while Briggs lay near the door, thin and silent, watching him with the solemn caution of a creature who had survived too many wrong rooms. Neither of them trusted the other, Not yet, but neither of them left. By morning, the cabin no longer felt empty. It had not become warm in the cheerful sense. No miracle had rearranged the furniture. No laughter had taken root in the corners. The same narrow bed stood beneath the same folded blanket. The same black coffee cooled beside the same kitchen window, and the same old military watch rested against Callum Mercer's wrist, like a small piece of the past that refused burial. But near the door, where the floorboards caught the cold draft, Briggs lay awake. The old German shepherd had not moved much through the night. He had chosen a place where he could see the front door, the window, the stove, and Callum's chair all at once. That choice told Callum more than any bark would have. Comfort had not yet become Briggs's first instinct position had. Callum understood that too well. He was standing at the stove, stirring oatmeal he did not want. When tires crunched over snow outside, Briggs raised his head before Callum reached for the curtain. A red scarf flashed past the window. Of course, Callum muttered. Willa Mercer came in carrying enough supplies to suggest she had either visited a pet store or robbed one with strong moral conviction. She had soft canned food stacked in a paper bag, 2 folded blankets, a packet of joint treats, a stainless steel bowl, and the expression of a woman who had arrived prepared to win every argument. Willa, at 51, looked smaller against the winter morning than her will had any right to allow. Her cream wool coat was dusted with snow, her chestnut hair was pinned badly beneath a knit hat, and her green eyes shone with equal parts concern and determination. She glanced at Briggs first, then at Callum, and her mouth tightened. You two look like you spent the night negotiating a border treaty. He stayed by the door, Callum said. You slept. Some. That means no. Callum took one of the bags from her. Morning to you too. Willa stepped carefully inside, moving slower than usual so Briggs could watch her without feeling rushed. She did not approach him. That was new. Yesterday, she might have reached out from kindness. Today, she had learned that kindness sometimes needed to keep its hands to itself. I called Dr. Miriam Vale, she said. Callum stopped. No. Yes. Willa. Callum. He's not ready for a clinic. I know. She's coming here. He looked at her then, and she lifted her chin in victory before he could object. You bought an old dog who was underweight, limping and refusing food, Willa said. You are not going to heal him with stoicism and black coffee. I wasn't planning on giving him coffee. That is not as comforting as you think. Briggs watched them both, amber eyes moving from one voice to the other. His body remained low, but his ears tracked every shift in tone. Callum looked at the dog, then at the food in Willa's bag. He knew she was right. That annoyed him less than it should have. Dr. Miriam Vale arrived just after 9 in a pale blue pickup with a dented bumper and a small silver cross hanging from the rearview mirror. She stepped out into the snow with the steadiness of someone who had walked into barns, kitchens, and grief, stricken back rooms without expecting the world to make room for her. Miriam was 46, tall enough to carry authority without needing to raise her voice, with a lean, practical strength in her shoulders. Her skin was warm brown, her dark hair loosely curled and tied at the nape of her neck, and her eyes were the color of old honey held up to firelight. She wore a deep moss, green wool coat over a gray turtleneck, brown work pants tucked into winter boots, and carried a weathered leather veterinary bag that looked older than half the town. She was the kind of woman who did not confuse gentleness with softness. Years of treating frightened animals and ashamed owners had given her a calm that did not bend easily. When she entered the cabin, Briggs rose. He did not bark. He did not bare his teeth. He simply stepped between Miriam and Callum with the silent accuracy of a guard taking a position. Miriam stopped at once. Well, she said softly, looking not at his teeth, but at his stance. You don't miss much, do you, old man? Briggs held her gaze. Miriam did not crouch. Not yet. She let her hands hang open at her sides, then slowly placed her bag on the floor several feet away. I'm Miriam, she said, as if speaking to a person who had the right to refuse her. I make a poor first impression on dogs who dislike strangers. Happily, I'm patient enough to be boring. Willa almost smiled. Callum watched Miriam with quiet approval. She did not try to charm Briggs. She did not make kissing sounds or offer a treat like a bribe. She stood in the dog's weather and waited for the storm to decide what it would do. After a long minute, Briggs lowered his head and sniffed the air. That's enough for the first vote, Miriam said. Callum, sit near the stove. Don't hold him unless I ask. Let him choose whether you're an anchor or furniture. I've been called worse. I suspected. The examination took nearly an hour. Miriam let Briggs smell her gloves first, then the cuff of her coat, then the stethoscope. Each movement was slow, announced before it happened, never sneaking behind him. Briggs tolerated it with rigid dignity. When Miriam touched his ribs, his skin twitched. When she checked the stiffness in his left rear leg, his jaw tightened, but he did not snap. When she lifted one paw, he watched her hand as if recording evidence for a trial. "He's dehydrated," Miriam said, not severely. "Underfed. Yes. Muscle loss along the hips. Teeth worn. Some arthritis. Likely the coat looks worse than the skin. Thank God." Willa exhaled. Callum did not. Miriam parted the fur along Briggs's shoulder and paused. Beneath the yellow-black coat, hidden under rough hair and old dirt, ran a thin white scar. Then another. Not fresh, not dramatic, but arranged in a way that made Miriam's expression still. "What?" Callum asked. Miriam did not answer immediately. She checked Briggs's front paws, turning them gently, studying the pads. They were hardened, not like a dog that had wandered aimlessly on roads, but like one that had worked over ice, rock, and packed snow for years. She looked at his shoulders next, at the way old muscle still held memory beneath neglect. Then, from her bag, Miriam took a small metal instrument to test his reflex response. It clicked faintly when she opened it. Briggs changed. Not fear, not panic. His head came up, his body aligned, his breathing slowed. For one strange second, the tired old shepherd in the cabin vanished, and something trained, precise and buried beneath years of abandonment looked out through his amber eyes. The room went silent. Even the stove seemed to lower its flame. Miriam held still, the instrument open in her hand. Callum felt the hair rise along the back of his neck. Not from danger, but from recognition. He had seen men respond to a sound like that before. Not because they wanted to, because some part of them had been built to answer. Willa whispered. "What was that?" Miriam slowly closed the instrument. Briggs blinked, and the moment passed. His body loosened by a fraction, but he did not lie down. Miriam's voice was quiet when she spoke. This dog wasn't merely owned, he was conditioned. Callum looked at Briggs. "Military," Willa asked. "Maybe search and rescue, weather route work, utility support, something structured." Miriam ran a thumb lightly over one of Briggs's scarred paw pads. Dogs don't invent this kind of discipline because life was unkind. Someone taught him that every sound meant something. Callum felt the words settle deep. Every sound meant something for years. Every sound in his own life had meant something too. A pop in the stove, a branch cracking under snow, a truck slowing near the cabin. Most people heard noise. Callum heard maps of danger. Briggs, it seemed, had been living inside a similar map. Miriam finished the exam and packed her tools slowly. She laid out instructions with the precision of a doctor and the mercy of a friend. Small meals several times a day. Warm water available. No heavy exercise, no stairs, if avoidable. Joint support, a follow-up visit in a week. No crowded clinic until Briggs had steadied. "Do not overfeed him because you feel guilty," she said. Callum glanced at Willa. Willa pointed at him. "She means you too." Miriam handed Callum a paper with measured portions written clearly. "Love can harm when it panics. Go slow." Briggs had settled near the stove by then, though not on the blanket Willa had placed there. He lay half on the warm boards, half angled toward the door, compromising with comfort as if it were a treaty he did not fully trust. Before leaving, Miriam paused beside Callum. "He is not broken," she said, "but do not ask him to become normal just because normal would be easier for you." Callum looked toward the dog. Miriam continued, "A dog like Briggs does not need to be conquered. He needs the world explained again." That sentence remained in the cabin long after her truck disappeared between the pines. The next days moved in small increments. Callum followed the feeding plan, exactly. He set the bowl down, then stepped away. At first, Briggs only ate when Callum turned his back. Then he ate when Callum stood across the room. On the fourth evening, while snow darkened the windows and the fire gave the walls a trembling gold, Briggs took 3 slow bites with Callum still sitting in the chair. Callum did not praise him loudly. He only said, "Good." The word was low, almost swallowed by the fire. Briggs paused, looked at him, then ate one more bite. That was how trust entered the cabin. Not like sunlight through thrown open doors, but like water finding cracks in stone. a bowl by the stove, a blanket that slowly gathered dog hair, paw prints at the threshold, Willa's soft food cans stacked beside Callum's coffee tins. The cabin did not become less orderly, but it became less sterile. Something living had begun to leave evidence. Callum still woke at night. The dream came on the 6th night after Briggs arrived. It dragged him from sleep with the smell of smoke and metal in his throat. He sat upright on the edge of the bed, one hand gripping the blanket, the other pressed against his chest as if he could hold himself in the present by force. The room was dark except for coals in the stove. He heard movement. Briggs rose from the corner. Callum stiffened, ashamed before he knew why. He did not want witnesses to this. Not Willa, not Miriam, not a dog who already carried enough ghosts beneath his own skin. But Briggs did not rush him. The old shepherd walked slowly across the room, stopped beside Callum's boots, and lowered himself to the floor. He placed his muzzle near the worn leather, not touching Callum, not demanding anything. Just near enough to say, in the language of breath and stillness, that the room was not empty. Callum's hand trembled. The dog closed his eyes. Something in Callum cracked, not open, not healed, but loosened enough for breath to pass through. He sat that way until the coals faded. By morning, he pretended nothing had happened. Briggs allowed the lie. 3 days later, Tobin Russ came to the cabin. Tobin was 57, shorter than Callum but built thick as a split oak stump, with a heavy neck, a square face reddened by weather, and a gray steel beard trimmed close to his jaw. His dark brown eyes were blunt and tired, but not unkind. He wore an orange rescue jacket faded at the seams, black waterproof cargo pants, snow boots, and a navy knit cap pulled low over his ears. A radio sat clipped to his chest, and the faint smell of peppermint followed him, because Tobin chewed mints whenever he was worried, and denied it whenever anyone noticed. He had known Callum long enough not to knock like a stranger, but he still waited outside until Callum opened the door. Briggs stood between them. Tobin looked down at the old shepherd. Briggs looked up at Tobin after a thoughtful pause. Tobin said, "Well, there are now 2 old men guarding this cabin. Should I leave the county badge with you or him?" Callum did not smile. Almost, Tobin noticed, and looked pleased with himself. He came inside only after Briggs moved aside half a step. Not permission exactly. More like a temporary visa. Tobin accepted coffee, refused a chair, then took the chair when Callum stared at him long enough. He did not waste much time. "We're short on winter search volunteers," he said. "Young ones have energy. Half of them think a charged battery is the same as judgment." Callum looked into his mug. "I'm not joining a team. Didn't ask you to join a team. Asked you to keep idiots alive near one. No, you haven't heard the pitch. I know your pitches." Tobin pulled a folded paper from his jacket and laid it on the table. Part-time, training days, route reading, cold weather judgment, basic field stabilization. You don't have to be charming. That's good. It'd be a deal breaker otherwise. Callum looked toward Briggs, who had returned to his place near the door. The dog's eyes were half closed, but both ears were listening. "I'm not the man for it," Callum said. Tobin's voice lost its rough humor. "Maybe not, but you're the man we've got." The words did not flatter him. That was why they reached him. Tobin stood to leave. At the door, he glanced once at Briggs. Dog knows a thing or two about watch duty. Callum did not answer. After Tobin left, the cabin grew quiet again. Callum sat at the table with the folded form before him. The paper looked harmless. White, thin, ordinary. Yet it might as well have been a bridge thrown across a canyon. Briggs lay near the door, silver muzzle resting on his paws, eyes almost shut. Callum wondered, not for the first time, whether he had brought the dog home to save him, or whether Briggs had simply arrived first at a door Callum himself had been afraid to open. For 3 days, the paper stayed on the table. On the 4th morning, Callum signed it. The pen scratched once across the page, small and final. Briggs lifted his head. Callum folded the form, put on his faded green jacket, and reached for his boots. "This isn't your job," he said. Briggs watched him in silence. Outside, winter pressed its pale face to the windows. Inside, the old dog's amber eyes followed Callum, as if he knew something the man did not. Not where the next road led. Only that some roads began long before anyone was ready to walk them. The Cedar Hollow Volunteer Rescue Station had once been a storage barn for road salt. The town had dressed it up as best it could. Fresh white paint covered the outer boards. A blue sign with chipped gold lettering hung above the wide door. Inside, maps of the northern ridges covered one wall from floor to ceiling, marked with red pins, blue string, and handwritten notes from rescues. Nobody in town liked to discuss too loudly. Coils of rope hung from hooks. Snowshoes leaned in neat rows near the back. Orange rescue jackets, thermal blankets, headlamps, radios, ice picks, and folded stretchers filled metal shelves that smelled faintly of rubber, coffee, and old storms. To Callum Mercer, it was too loud, not chaos. Chaos had a different taste. This place had order purpose. Men and women moved between tables, checked batteries, filled thermoses, argued over weather reports, and laughed in the quick, nervous way people laughed when they knew winter was listening. Still, every sound found him. A locker slammed. A radio hissed. Someone dragged a chair across concrete. Callum stood near the door in his faded green military jacket, brown-gray flannel buttoned beneath it, boots planted squarely. Gray-blue eyes taking in exits, windows, equipment, faces. He had signed Tobin's paper. That did not mean the room had become easy. Tobin Rusk clapped one heavy hand on a table at the front. Listen up. The voices settled. Tobin, 57, broad and weathered, wore his faded orange rescue jacket like a second hide. His gray beard was trimmed close. His navy knit cap sat low over his ears, and a peppermint bulged in one cheek like evidence he would deny under oath. He pointed at Callum with 2 fingers. This is Callum Mercer, Tobin said. He knows cold. He knows bad terrain. He knows how fast confidence turns stupid when snow starts lying to your face. When he talks, listen. A few volunteers turned with interest, others with caution. Callum gave them a short nod, neither friendly nor unfriendly. From the far table, a younger man looked up from a tablet. Reed Collins was 29, tall and lean, with restless energy packed into a frame that looked built for climbing fences and arguing with instructions. His hair was dark blonde, clipped short on the sides and brushed up in front, and his narrow face carried the clean angles of youth not yet softened by enough failure. His eyes were bright blue, quick as a cursor, always moving between screens, maps, and whoever dared doubt either. He wore a cobalt, blue technical jacket, black trekking pants, touchscreen gloves, a smartwatch, and a compact drone pack slung over one shoulder like a badge of modern competence. Reed respected experience in the way young men sometimes respected old tools politely, from a distance, while believing something newer had replaced them. So, Reed said, not quite smiling, old school fieldcraft day? Tobin's eyes narrowed. Collins. Callum looked at Reed without irritation. If your GPS fails, do you know where north is? Reed tapped the tablet. My GPS doesn't fail. Tobin unwrapped another peppermint. That's what he said before he walked into Mrs. Tully's frozen duck pond last March. A few volunteers laughed. Reed flushed. That pond wasn't on the map. Callum's voice stayed calm. That was the lesson. The laughter grew warmer, and even Reed's mouth twitched despite himself. Over the next days, Callum taught without performing. He showed the volunteers how wind carves snow differently, along ridges and hollows. He made them kneel and press gloved hands into drifts to feel the difference between fresh powder and hollow crust. He explained why a quiet forest before a storm could be more dangerous than a loud one. He demonstrated how to keep a hypothermic person awake without frightening them into wasting heat. He did not speak about war. He did not need to. Every method he taught had the shape of someone who had learned lessons in places where mistakes did not forgive. Briggs came twice that first week. Not as a rescue dog, not as a mascot. Callum would not have allowed either. Dr. Miriam had suggested controlled exposure, short visits, distance, no crowding, so the old German shepherd could learn that the world beyond the cabin did not always demand something from him. Briggs entered the station the first time with his yellow and black coat brushed cleaner than before, though still rough at the shoulders. His silver muzzle made him look older under the fluorescent light, and his left rear leg moved stiffly after the cold ride. One ear stood tall, the other bent at the tip with that battered, stubborn dignity. He did not wag his tail. He did not sniff hands. He took position near the side door, where he could see Callum, Tobin, the main entrance, and most of the room. Reed looked over from his drone case. We got a retired supervisor now. Tobin glanced at Briggs. He's already better at attendance than you. I was late once. You were late to a missing person drill. Reed, that's spiritually impressive. Even Callum almost smiled. Briggs watched Reed with grave indifference, which somehow made the joke land harder. Dr. Miriam Vale visited the station the following week to check Briggs after one of the training sessions. She arrived in her moss green coat, leather bag in hand, her dark curls tied low and her brown eyes as composed as ever. She examined Briggs in the corner, away from the noisy tables, speaking quietly as she checked his gait, ribs, hydration, and the healing condition of his coat. He's improving, she told Callum. Slowly. That is the only speed that matters. Tobin leaned nearby. Could he have been trained for search work? Miriam hesitated, then took a folded printout from her bag. I ran the chip. Callum looked at her. Partial record only, she said. His registered name is Briggs, male German Shepherd, assigned years ago to a winter route support program connected to county weather stations and remote maintenance teams. Old Lark Ridge is listed in the region notes. Reed looked up. Weather stations use dogs? In certain terrain? Yes, Miriam said. Not to replace humans, to support route finding, hazard detection, and movement through low visibility conditions before better drone coverage became common. But the program was dissolved. Records after that are incomplete. Callum's gaze moved to Briggs. The old dog lay with his muzzle on his paws, eyes half closed. But at the words, Old Lark Ridge, his standing ear shifted. Only once. Then he went still again. No one else seemed to notice. Callum did. The name hung in the air, like a small bell struck far away. For a moment, he felt the strange weight of a map being opened inside the wrong body, the way a forgotten road might wait beneath snow for years. Not gone, only covered. He said nothing. But from then on, whenever the station radio mentioned ridge weather, Callum noticed Briggs listening. Weeks passed. Briggs gained a little weight. His coat thickened along the neck and shoulders. Though the silver muzzle and scarred dignity remained, he still did not become playful. He did not chase balls or lean against strangers for comfort, but he began choosing Callum more openly, lying closer to his chair, standing when Callum stood, following at a distance that said not need, not yet, but decision. Willa saw it one afternoon when she arrived at the cabin with a basket of apple muffins and found Briggs resting near Callum's boots instead of by the door. She stopped so suddenly snow fell from her scarf. Well, she whispered, look at him. Callum glanced down. He's sleeping, he's choosing. Callum said nothing. Willa came inside and set the basket on the table. She looked at Briggs for a long time. Then her expression tightened with regret. I was wrong about him. You were worried. I called him too old before I knew what he had survived. Callum poured coffee. People do that. I do that. He handed her a mug. At least you noticed. Willa stared at him. That is the worst comfort I've ever received. I'm practicing. Keep your day job. They both looked at Briggs when the dog gave one slow breath in his sleep, as if unimpressed by all human attempts at growth. Then the storm began building. It arrived first as brightness. A clear morning, thin blue sky, sunlight on snow. Cedar Hollow looked washed clean, almost holy. By noon, the northern horizon had darkened. Gray cloud banks gathered beyond the pines, not rolling in dramatically, but advancing with the patience of an army that knew no one could stop it. At the rescue station, the radio traffic thickened. Tobin stood over the main table with a weather report in one hand and a peppermint wrapper crushed in the other. Reed had 3 screens open: radar, wind model, county emergency feed. Volunteers moved faster now, checking fuel, ropes, blankets, headlamps. The first alert came just after 1. Old Lark Ridge weather station had gone offline. At first, that meant inconvenience. Then the county dispatch called again. 3 maintenance workers had gone up that morning to repair a pressure sensor before the storm intensified. They were supposed to report back before noon. They had not. Their vehicle was still logged at the lower access road. No radio response, no phone signal. Tobin's face hardened in the way Callum had come to recognize. Not panic, calculation. Names? He asked. The dispatcher gave them. Elias Venn, 62, senior weather station technician, due to retire in spring. Elias was a lean, white-haired man with a bent back, wind-brown skin, and pale gray eyes that had spent 4 decades reading skies more honestly than most people read faces. He was known in the county for fixing equipment in weather that made younger men invent stomach trouble. Mara Collins, 34, local meteorological field specialist. No relation to Reed despite the shared surname. Mara was tall, athletic, with copper-brown skin, black hair usually braided tight under her work hat, and a reputation for being calm enough to make a thunderstorm feel underdressed. She had transferred from Portland after her father's stroke, choosing the small county job so she could care for him and still serve the region she loved. Owen Pike, 24, trainee technician. Owen was lanky, pale, red-haired, and new enough to the job that he still kept his boots too clean. People liked him because he asked careful questions and wrote down the answers. People worried about him because winter punished careful people almost as easily as careless ones. They went up to keep the station running, Tobin said quietly after the call ended. Now the station can't tell us what's happening to them? The room changed? No jokes now. No argument. Just movement. Callum was at his cabin when Tobin called. I need you, Tobin said. Station. Now. Callum hung up, already reaching for his jacket. Briggs stood from the hearth. No, Callum said. The old shepherd did not move. This isn't a walk. Briggs stepped toward the door. Callum stopped with one hand on the knob. He remembered Miriam's warning. He remembered the partial chip record. He remembered the way Briggs's ear had moved at the words, Old Lark Ridge. The dog looked at him without pleading, not asking, recognizing. Callum opened the truck door at the station. Reed objected before Callum had fully stepped inside. You can't be serious. He's not certified. He's old. He's recovering. We can't take an untested dog into a weather rescue. He's not going into the main line, Callum said. That surprised Reed enough to silence him. Callum turned to Tobin. Your call. Tobin looked from Callum to Briggs, then to Miriam, who had arrived after hearing the alert, and now stood near the equipment shelf, face grave. Miriam spoke first. He cannot be treated like a tool. If he shows pain, distress, fatigue, or cold stress, he turns back immediately. Tobin nodded, agreed. Reed crossed his arms. Then why bring him at all? Callum answered. Because he may know a support route. Your tablet doesn't. Reed's jaw tightened. Tobin held up a hand. Here's how it goes. Main team takes the marked service road. Mercer and Briggs stay low with support team, checking the old lower route only within radio range. No heroics. No splitting off. No improvising without command. He looked at Callum. If I say turn back, you turn back. Callum nodded once. Tobin looked at Briggs. Same goes for you, grandfather. Briggs blinked. Reed muttered. Great, the dog outranks me now. Tobin grabbed a rope bag. Only if he's on time. Within minutes, the rescue convoy moved toward Old Lark Ridge. 2 trucks, a medical van staged below. Ropes, thermal blankets, radios, GPS units, paper maps, flares, headlamps, and enough caution to prove this was not a story about men rushing foolishly into white danger. Snow began to fall before they reached the lower access road. By the time Callum opened the truck door at the foot of the ridge, wind had started combing through the trees with icy fingers. The sky had lowered until the mountain seemed to be wearing it like a hood. Briggs stepped down into the snow. For a moment, the old dog stood very still. The wind lifted the silver fur along his muzzle. His nose angled toward the slope. His amber eyes narrowed, not with fear, but with concentration so deep it seemed to draw the mountain toward him. Then he inhaled, slowly, once, twice, and looked toward the buried line of trees on the lower ridge, as if somewhere beneath the snow, an old road had just whispered his name. Old Lark Ridge did not roar at first. That was what made it dangerous. The storm moved in breaths, quiet one moment, vicious the next. Snow fell so softly at times that the rescuers could hear it brushing against their jackets. Then the wind would turn, and the whole mountainside vanish behind a white rush, erasing footprints, tree lines, and confidence with the same cold hand. Callum Mercer stood at the lower access point with one glove wrapped around Briggs's lead, and the other resting near the paper map folded inside his jacket. His faded green military coat was already dusted white at the shoulders. The wind pushed at his dark brown hair and lifted the silver at his temples. His gray-blue eyes moved over the ridge, not searching for drama, only for truth. Beside him, Briggs stood still. The old German shepherd's yellow and black coat had thickened over the past weeks, but the cold still found him. Snow gathered along his silver muzzle. His one upright ear faced the slope while the bent ear twitched in the wind. He did not pull. He did not whine. He simply breathed in the mountain as if reading a letter written long ago. Tobin Rusk's voice crackled through the radio. Main team moving up the Mark Service Road, Mercer. You take the lower support line. Stay within range. 10 minute position checks. No heroics. Callum pressed the button. Copy. Reed Collins adjusted the strap on his drone pack, his blue technical jacket bright against the white world. At 29, Reed still had the restless, sharp-edged look of a man who believed preparation could defeat uncertainty, if only everyone used the right tools. His tablet was mounted in a weatherproof case against his chest, its screen glowing with a digital map, signal bars, wind data, and more confidence than the mountain deserved. The fourth person in Callum's group was June Alvarez, 38, a volunteer rescuer and former forestry surveyor. She was short, sturdy, and sure-footed with tan skin, dark hair tucked under a gray wool cap, and brown eyes that seemed to measure distance without needing instruments. June had the calm practicality of someone who had spent years walking through trees that did not care about human schedules. She wore a faded red rescue shell, black snow pants, and carried a probe pole with one hand as naturally as another person might carry a walking stick. June looked at Reed's tablet, then at the ridge. That screen going to tell the wind to behave? Reed gave her a tight smile. No, but it might tell us where not to die. Good. I like polite technology. Callum almost smiled. They moved out in a short line, Briggs near Callum's left, Reed behind him, June at the rear, checking the ground with her probe. The lower route was not truly a trail anymore. It was a memory pressed into the land. An old maintenance path used before the county cut the newer service road farther east. Pines crowded close. Snow filled the gaps between rocks. The slope rose in uneven shelves, some hidden beneath drifts that looked harmless until June tested them and found emptiness underneath. At first, Reed's equipment worked well enough. The GPS placed them along the lower contour. His tablet showed the old ridgeline, the main access road, and the weather station as a blue dot pulsing somewhere above them. He launched the drone once from a small clearing, and its blades wind upward into the snow. For 90 seconds, the screen showed a pale, broken image of treetops and rock. Then the wind hit. The drone lurched sideways. Reed cursed softly and brought it down before it vanished into the storm. When it landed, it tipped into powder like a wounded bird. June looked at him. Still polite? Reed wiped snow off the drone. It's having a difficult conversation with the atmosphere. Poor thing. Callum did not mock him. He only watched the slope. Technology is useful, he said, until the mountain asks it a question it can't answer. Reed's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. They continued. The snow deepened as the trees thickened. Somewhere above them, Tobin's main team moved along the marked service road. Their radio reports came steady but strained. Visibility was falling. Wind speed increasing. No sign yet of Elias, Mara, or Owen. Callum kept his pace slow for Briggs. The old dog moved carefully, saving strength. He did not behave like a young tracking dog eager for scent. He worked differently. He paused often, lifting his nose, turning his head, listening to things the others could not separate from the storm. Sometimes he ignored the easiest path and chose firmer ground near exposed roots. Sometimes he stopped until June probed ahead and found a soft pocket beneath the snow. Reed noticed. Callum could tell by the silence. After 20 minutes, Briggs halted near a half-buried post. At first, it looked like a broken branch. Then June brushed snow from the top and revealed weathered wood beneath, stained gray by years of wind. A faded symbol had been burned into it. 3 diagonal marks beneath a circle, almost gone. June frowned. One that old county route marker. Reed checked his tablet. It's not on here. Callum unfolded the paper map Tobin had given him. The paper was laminated and creased at the corners, marked with old pencil notes from people who had walked the ridge before the new road existed. A thin line ran through the trees to their right. Briggs was already looking that way. Reed leaned over the map. That path was retired years ago. Retired isn't the same as gone, Callum said. June planted her probe into the snow. If the main road iced over or got blocked, someone who knew the old station might try to cut down this way. Reed's eyes flicked toward Briggs. Or the dog just likes trees. Briggs turned his head and looked at him. Not angrily, worse, patiently. June coughed into her glove to hide a laugh. Callum radioed Tobin. Found an old lower route marker. Briggs is indicating toward the retired path. Request permission to check within rope range. Static answered first. Then Tobin, proceed slow. Stay tied, report every 5. If the dog slows, you stop. If visibility drops below safe return, you turn back. Copy. They clipped into a short safety line. June took the rear. Reed secured the middle. Callum moved ahead with Briggs, careful not to let the dog pull beyond the safe distance. The route narrowed between pines and tilted along a rocky slope. Snow fell thicker now, but under the trees the wind broke into pieces. Briggs stopped again. He lowered his nose near a branch and held there. Reed stepped closer. What is it? Callum pointed. A strip of orange fabric clung to a low twig, half covered in ice. Reed pulled off one glove, then thought better of it, and used 2 fingers through the glove to free the scrap. It was reflective material torn from a county maintenance jacket. The color drained a little from his face. That could be from them, June said. Reed placed the fabric in a plastic evidence sleeve from his pack. His voice lost some of its edge. Yeah, they moved faster after that, but not recklessly. The ridge steepened. Snow loaded against the upper side of the path, twice. June made them stop while she probed for hollow drifts. Once, the radio cut out for nearly a full minute, leaving only wind and breath. Then Reed made his mistake. It was small, almost nothing. His tablet beeped with a weak position correction, and his eyes dropped toward the screen. His right boot shifted half a step outside the line of packed snow. Briggs moved before Callum spoke. The old shepherd swung sideways with surprising speed and blocked Reed's leg, shoulder low, a deep warning sound rising in his chest. Reed snapped. Hey! Callum grabbed the back of Reed's jacket and pulled him hard. June drove the probe into the place Reed had nearly stepped. The pole punched through. No resistance. June's face went still. She lowered herself, brushed away powder, and revealed a narrow crack between snow-covered rocks. It dropped into darkness deeper than the eye wanted to measure. Nobody spoke. Reed stared down at the hole. The wind moved through it with a faint hollow moan like the mountain breathing under the snow. Briggs remained planted between Reed and the crack. Amber eyes fixed on him, chest rising and falling. The old dog's body trembled now, but not from fear, from effort, from age, from the cost of knowing where not to step. Reed swallowed. For the first time since Callum had met him, the young man had no clever answer. He lowered his tablet slowly. Thanks, he said. It was not loud, it was not polished, but it was honest. Briggs looked away, as if human gratitude was not part of his job description. They continued with Reed's eyes on the ground more often than on the screen. A quarter-mile later, the old route bent near a low rock face. The wind shifted there, carrying something different beneath the scent of pine and snow. Briggs lifted his head. Callum smelled it a few seconds later. Cold oil, old metal, and smoke so faint it might have been a memory. Reed noticed Callum's expression. What equipment? Callum said. Maybe a battery unit. June pointed ahead. Rock pocket. Between 2 snow-capped boulders, almost hidden by a drift, lay a dark slit in the ridge. Not a cave exactly. More like a maintenance hollow cut into the stone decades ago. The kind of place workers might use to shelter from sudden weather. Snow had sealed most of the entrance. Then came a sound. Tap very faint. They all froze. Tap tap. Reed's head jerked up. There. He was already moving before Callum told him to slow down. This time, though, he stayed inside the line. Callum dropped beside the drift and began digging with gloved hands. June joined with her shovel. Reed used the edge of his folded snow saw to cut packed ice from the entrance. Briggs stood close, nose to the crack, breathing hard but steady. County rescue, Callum shouted. If you can hear me, tap again. For a moment, nothing. Then 3 weak taps answered. June radioed. Contact confirmed. Lower old route, Rock Hollow. Need support. Medical. Stretcher team. Repeat. Contact confirmed. Static broke. Then Tobin's voice came through sharp and alive. Hold position. Main team redirecting. Medical moving. They cleared the entrance enough for Callum to crawl inside first. The hollow smelled of cold stone, dying smoke, wet wool, and fear held too long. Elias Venn lay near the back wall, his yellow parka torn at the knee, one leg twisted awkwardly and braced with a metal tool handle. His lean face was gray beneath windburn, white hair stuck to his forehead, pale eyes open but clouded with pain. Even injured, he had one gloved hand resting protectively on a cracked instrument case. as if 40 years of service had taught him to guard the equipment even while freezing beside it. Mara Collins knelt beside him, her copper, brown face drawn with exhaustion, black braids stiff with frost along one shoulder. She had wrapped her own outer jacket around Owen Pike, who lay curled near the inner wall. Mara's hands shook, but her voice stayed controlled when she saw Callum. "Owen's coldest," she said. "Elias can't walk. Radio failed. Spare battery cracked." Owen, 24 and too pale beneath freckles, barely stirred. His red hair was damp with melted snow and frozen again at the edges. His lips had gone bluish. One hand still clutched a small notebook against his chest, as if even unconscious he had tried to keep track of what went wrong. Callum moved into work. No wasted words. He checked Owen's breathing, pulse, skin temperature. He had read pass in thermal blankets. June stabilized Elias's leg. Mara tried to help until Callum told her to sit before she became a fourth patient. Briggs came only as far as the entrance. The wind funneled through the opening, and he positioned himself beside it, not blocking the rescuers, but cutting the worst of the draft from Owen's side. His old body shivered. Callum noticed immediately. "Briggs," he warned. The dog did not move. Reed looked from Briggs to Owen, then stripped off his neck gaiter and placed it over Briggs's shoulders like a poor excuse for a blanket. His hand hesitated before touching the old dog's coat. Briggs allowed it. Mara watched through half-lidded eyes. "That dog," she whispered. "He knows this place." Elias's gaze shifted, slow and watery. He looked at Briggs, and something like recognition moved through his pain. "There was a shepherd," he rasped. "Years back, route dog before they cut the new road." Callum leaned closer. "You knew him." Elias blinked against the cold. "Not by name. I saw him once. Yellow-black, silver starting on the muzzle. Even then, he brought a crew down in fog. We all joked the dog knew the ridge better than the county did." His eyes filled. "God forgive us," Elias whispered. "We forgot the dog. The dog didn't forget the road." Outside, voices approached through the storm. Tobin arrived with the stretcher team, face iced with snow, peppermint forgotten somewhere in his cheek. Medical volunteers moved in fast, efficient, and careful. Owen was wrapped, warmed, and secured. Elias's leg was splinted properly. Mara was checked for exposure and forced, over her objections, to take a heat pack under each arm. The descent was slow. Briggs stayed near Callum but no longer ahead. His work was done, and age had returned to his bones. Reed walked on the windward side more than once, shielding the old dog without making a show of it. No one teased him. Some lessons deserve silence. At the lower access road, ambulance lights glowed red through the snow. Owen was alive. Mara was conscious. Elias, pale but clear, eyed now, gripped Callum's sleeve as they loaded him. "What's his name?" the old technician asked. "Briggs." Elias turned his head toward the German shepherd standing in the wash of emergency lights, snow clinging to his silver muzzle and bent ear. "Briggs," Elias repeated, as though returning a name to a place that had misplaced it. Tell him the ridge remembers now." Callum looked down at the old dog. Briggs did not wag his tail. He did not understand applause, praise, or the human need to turn survival into legend. He only looked back at Callum with those steady amber eyes, tired and bright beneath the snow. And in that look, Callum felt the truth settle quietly between them. A mission buried for years had found its way home. By sunrise, Cedar Hollow already knew. Not officially, not through a newspaper headline or a county statement, or one of those polished announcements that made danger sound tidy after it had passed. The town learned the way small northern towns always learned, through a whispered call before breakfast, through a gas station clerk leaning over the counter, through a church secretary pausing with one hand over the bulletin, through a waitress at Millie's diner carrying coffee to table 3 and lowering her voice as if the story itself might startle. 3 people had been brought down alive from Old Lark Ridge, and an old German shepherd, the one no one had wanted at Eldon Pratt's kennel, had led the lower team to the forgotten route. By 8 o'clock, the story had already grown legs. By 9, it had grown wings. Some said Briggs had followed a scent no human could find. Others claimed he had recognized an old marker buried under snow. One man at the gas station insisted the dog had stood in the storm like a prophet from the Book of Job, which made Tobin Rusk, who happened to be buying coffee behind him, snort so hard he nearly wasted half a peppermint. "Don't make him glow in the dark," Tobin said. "He's a dog, not a lantern." The gas station clerk, a round-faced woman named Darla Meeks, 54, with silver blonde hair pinned under a red visor and hands always smelling faintly of coffee grounds, leaned forward eagerly. Darla had the kind of cheerful curiosity that could turn a receipt into a confession if a customer stood still too long. "But he remembered the old road, didn't he?" she asked. Tobin took his coffee. "He remembered something the rest of us let get buried." That version traveled faster than the others. Callum Mercer hated all of it. He hated the attention, the way trucks slowed near his drive, the way people looked toward his cabin as if a miracle might come outside to stretch its legs. He hated the way reporters from the county paper left 2 messages on his answering machine before noon. He hated most of all the word hero, because people used it when they wanted the end of a story to be cleaner than the middle had been. Briggs did not care. The old shepherd slept beside the stove with Reed Collins's neck gaiter still folded over the back of a chair nearby, now dry and smelling faintly of snow, young man cologne and humility. Briggs's yellow and black coat had thawed into damp waves around the shoulders. His silver muzzle rested on his paws. One ear stood, the bent one drooped in sleep. He had eaten half his morning portion and accepted exactly one respectful scratch from Willa, before looking at her, as if she had exceeded her visitation privileges. Willa took that as progress. She arrived around noon with an apple pie held proudly in both hands. Willa Mercer, in her cream coat and red scarf, filled the doorway with more warmth than the weak winter sun. Snow clung to the edge of her boots, and her chestnut hair had escaped its pins in wisps around her cheeks. She looked from Callum to Briggs, then lifted the pie. "I brought tribute for the $100 gentleman." Callum opened the door wider. "Don't call him that." "Fine. The $100 Lord of Cedar Hollow." Briggs opened one eye. Willa lowered her voice. "Your Grace." Callum almost laughed. Almost. That was becoming a dangerous habit. She set the pie on the table and watched Briggs carefully. Her expression softened, but something pained lived beneath it. Yesterday she had called the dog tired. Before that, she had called him too old, too weak, too much trouble. Now the whole town was learning what those words had failed to see. "I owe him an apology," she said. "He doesn't hold grudges," Callum replied. Willa looked at Briggs. "That is clearly false. He remembers everything." Callum poured coffee. "Maybe. That's not the same thing." The next afternoon, Reed Collins came by the cabin. He claimed he was returning a rope bag. The rope bag belonged to the station, not Callum. Both men knew this. Neither mentioned it. Reed looked different out of the storm, younger, mostly, without snow crusted across his blue jacket and fear pulling the sharpness from his face. He was again the quick, capable young rescuer who moved like the world was a system waiting to be solved. But something in him had shifted. His tablet was not in his hands. It was zipped inside his pack. He stood on the porch, dark blonde hair flattened by his knit cap, blue eyes avoiding Briggs for exactly 1 second too long. "I wanted to say thanks," Reed said. Callum leaned against the doorframe. "You did already," to him. Briggs stood behind Callum, not blocking the door, not welcoming Reed either. His amber eyes examined the young man with the solemn patience of a judge who had seen better lawyers. Reed crouched, slowly this time, not too close. He placed one gloved hand on his own knee, palm open. "Thanks," he said to Briggs. "For the crack in the rocks." Briggs stared. Reed waited. Nothing happened. Callum said, "That was moving." Reed exhaled, and the laugh that followed was small but real. "He hates me." "He doesn't hate you. He looks like he's reviewing my character. He probably is." Reed nodded, as if accepting a fair sentence. "Can you teach me?" Callum raised one brow. "Not to handle him," Reed said quickly. "I mean, how to not be an idiot around a dog like him. Around terrain, too, I thought. Because I could map something, I understood it." Callum looked past him, toward the pines where snow bent the branches low. "Technology saves lives," Callum said. "I know. But it doesn't replace looking up." Reed nodded. For once, he did not defend himself. Over the next week, Reed returned twice, then 3 times. He learned to stand sideways, not square, to wait before offering a hand, to let Briggs choose distance. Callum showed him basic silent field signals, not as commands to possess Briggs, but as a language of clarity. Briggs tolerated Reed with the air of an old professor forced to supervise a promising but exhausting student. One afternoon, Reed gave a small halt signal correctly. Briggs stopped. Only for a second. Reed's face lit, as if he had been knighted by the King of Winter. Callum said, "Don't look so happy. He'll raise tuition." Willa, who had come by with muffins, laughed so hard she had to set the basket down. But not all visits to the cabin were easy. On Thursday, Eldon Pratt came. He did not drive all the way up at first. Callum saw his truck parked where the gravel road widened near the lower pines. Eldon sat inside for nearly 5 minutes before he got out, as if shame had weight and he needed time to lift it. When he finally walked up the snowy path, he looked smaller than he had at the kennel. His brown canvas coat was buttoned wrong at the collar. His old cap was held in both hands. Wind reddened his rough face and pushed at the thin gray, blonde mustache above his mouth. Eldon had always been a practical man, the sort who believed a fence was either fixed or not fixed. A dog was either sellable or not sellable. Regret did not fit neatly into those categories, and it showed. Briggs rose before Eldon reached the porch. The old shepherd stepped between Callum and the door. No growl, no threat, only memory. Eldon stopped at the bottom step. "I won't come closer unless you say," he said. That was new. Callum waited. Eldon swallowed. "I didn't know what he was." Callum's voice was even. "You knew he was alive." The word struck quietly, but Eldon flinched as if they had made sound. Snow drifted between them. For a moment, Cedar Hollow seemed to hold its breath. The pines, the road, the cabin, the old dog with the bent ear, the man who had once sold him for $100 because usefulness had not been visible enough. Eldon looked at Briggs, and the roughness in his face collapsed into something older than business. "My father used to say," he murmured, "a man can get so used to counting feed bags he forgets what he's feeding." Callum said nothing. Eldon rubbed his cap between both hands. "I've got 2 older dogs in the back runs, one with a bad hip, one that hides whenever families come through. I was going to move them along cheap." Willa, who had arrived just in time to hear that, stiffened behind Callum. Eldon looked down. "I don't want to do that now." Briggs took one step forward, not toward Eldon exactly, toward the porch edge. Callum felt the shift more than saw it. It was not forgiveness. Dogs did not perform forgiveness for human comfort. It was permission to continue the conversation. Eldon lifted his eyes. "Would you come look, you, Miss Willa? Dr. Vale, maybe. Tell me what I'm doing wrong." Willa's voice softened, though not completely. "Are you asking because the town is talking?" Eldon nodded. "Partly. That's honest. I'm not proud of honest." "No," she said, "but it's better than useful lies." Callum looked at Briggs. The old dog stood still, silver muzzle pointed toward the man who had failed him. He did not move closer. He did not turn away. Callum heard Miriam's voice in memory. The world explained again. Maybe it was not only dogs that needed that. 2 days later, they went to Eldon's kennel. Not as buyers, as witnesses. Dr. Miriam Vale arrived in her pale blue truck with her leather bag, and the calm expression of a woman who intended to be kind without becoming decorative. Willa carried printed adoption forms she had stayed up late designing. Reed came with a toolbox, claiming Tobin had sent him, though everyone suspected Reed had sent himself. Eldon's kennel looked different in daylight after the rescue. Not because the building had changed, but because the people walking through it had. The same rows of German shepherds barked and shifted behind clean wire gates. The same straw smelled of winter and wet fur. But Eldon no longer moved like a salesman leading customers past imperfections. He moved like a man being shown his own house by ghosts. Miriam examined the older dogs first. She explained joint pain, stress signals, feeding recovery, and why a frightened dog refusing to perform was not the same as a bad dog. She spoke plainly, never shaming Eldon for sport, but never letting him hide behind ignorance either. Willa taped a sign above the end row. Some dogs need slower goodbyes to their old life. Reed read it, then looked at Briggs. "That's good." Willa smiled. "I considered, do not judge a soul by its limp." But Callum said it sounded like a church sign trying too hard. Callum was measuring a warped floorboard in one kennel and pretended not to hear. Reed and 2 rescue volunteers repaired the back runs, adding raised wooden platforms, safer heat lamps, thicker bedding, and better door latches. Eldon worked beside them, quiet and sweating despite the cold. Late in the afternoon, a family arrived, a mother, a father, and a little girl of about 10. The girl had dark curls under a purple hat, and solemn brown eyes that made her seem older when she was quiet and younger when she smiled. Her name was Lucy Harrow, and she walked with the careful seriousness of a child who had been told she could choose a dog but had not yet understood the size of such power. Her mother, Nina Harrow, was a slender woman in her late 30s with tired eyes and a gentle voice. Her father, Paul Harrow, was a broad-shouldered mechanic with grease still under one fingernail and the nervous tenderness of a man trying to give his child joy without making the wrong promise. At first, Lucy stopped near the puppies. Everyone did. One black and tan pup tumbled over his own paws and chewed his brother's ear with heroic stupidity. Lucy laughed, and even Briggs glanced over, perhaps offended by such undisciplined use of teeth. Then Willa spoke to the family quietly about older dogs, not with pressure, with story. Lucy listened. After a while, she walked past the puppies to the end row. There, an older female German shepherd lay on a blanket. She had a sable coat faded around the muzzle, one white scar along her front leg, and eyes that turned away before hope could embarrass her. Lucy crouched outside the gate. She looks sad, Paul said gently. Lucy shook her head thinking, no, she said. She looks like she doesn't know if we mean it. The adults went quiet. Willa looked toward Callum. Callum looked at Briggs. Briggs, lying near the door with his paws crossed and his silver muzzle in the winter light, watched the little girl as if some old lesson had just walked into the room wearing a purple hat. Lucy turned to Eldon. Does she need a home? Eldon's face tightened. This time, to his credit, he did not say price first. Yes, he said, but she'll need patience. Lucy nodded with enormous gravity. We have some. It was not a miracle with Thunder. It was smaller, better. The kind that could become a habit. By the end of the week, Tobin proposed a community program through the rescue station, winter safety classes, responsible adoption guidance for older working dogs, and a fund for medical checks before difficult dogs were written off as lost causes. Callum wanted nothing to do with standing in front of people. Tobin knew that, and smiled around a peppermint. You don't need a stage. You just need to teach folks how not to ignore signs. Callum looked at Briggs. The old shepherd's eyes were half closed, but his ears remained awake. Outside the kennel, sunlight broke through the clouds and struck the snow so brightly that the whole yard seemed briefly washed clean. Callum realized then that Briggs had not only led them to 3 people trapped on a mountain. He had led the town back to a road it had buried beneath convenience, pride, and hurry. A road where the old were not useless, where the wounded were not mistakes, where being slow to trust was not the same as being unworthy of love. Winter remained in Cedar Hollow, but it no longer looked like a wall for years. Snow had narrowed Callum Mercer's world. It had sealed his cabin from the town, softened the sound of passing trucks, buried the path to his porch, and made isolation feel almost respectable. A man could blame weather for an empty room. He could tell himself the road was too slick, the wind too sharp, the evenings too dark for visitors. But after Old Lark Ridge, the same snow began to reflect light. It lay across the forest floor like an unwritten page. It brightened the pines at dawn. It held the tracks of boots, deer, squirrels, and one aging German shepherd who moved through the drifts with stiff hips and the grave dignity of a retired king. Callum still woke before sunrise. He still checked the stove. He still poured black coffee and stood near the window before remembering he could sit. He still wore his faded green military jacket when he stepped outside, the shoulders pale from years of wind and use, the brown-gray flannel beneath it buttoned to the throat. His short, dark hair, silver at the temples, still looked as though the northern weather had argued with it, and lost by inches. He was not suddenly cured. The old dreams still came. Some nights, he woke with his breath caught and his hand pressed hard against his chest, as if the past had reached through the dark and tried to pull him backward. But now, when that happened, Briggs was there. The old shepherd did not climb onto the bed. He did not whine or panic or lick Callum's face like a dog in a sentimental painting. Briggs merely rose from his blanket near the stove, crossed the room with measured steps, and lay beside Callum's boots until the man remembered where he was. A cabin, a fire, Maine, not war, not smoke. Not the sound that came before losing someone, just winter outside, and a dog breathing in the dark. That was enough. At the rescue station, things changed in practical ways first. That was Cedar Hollow's preferred method of healing. Repair something before admitting the heart had moved. Reed Collins began carrying a folded paper map in the inside pocket of his cobalt. Blue jacket. He still used his drone, tablet, GPS, and weather models. He still loved anything that beeped with confidence. But now, before every training route, he looked up from the screen and studied the tree line, the wind, the weight of snow on branches. Tobin Rusk noticed, of course. Tobin noticed everything he could later pretend not to care about. The 57-year-old rescue chief, broad as an old stove and twice as stubborn, stood in the station one morning, chewing peppermint and watching Reed compare his digital route with an old survey map. "Careful, Collins," Tobin said. "One more paper map and you'll start respecting your elders." Reed did not look up. "I respect elders. You once called my radio system medieval. It has emotional similarities." June Alvarez, the sturdy forestry surveyor turned rescue volunteer, passed behind them with a coil of rope over one shoulder. Her dark eyes flicked toward Callum, then Briggs, who lay near the side door like a judge reluctantly attending court. June said, "The dog respects elders. He just doesn't respect fools." Briggs opened one amber eye, as if confirming the statement. Even Callum smiled at that. Willa Mercer, meanwhile, had turned Briggs's story into action before Callum could stop her. She did not call it publicity. She called it community repair, which sounded gentle until one realized Willa treated community repair like a military campaign with baked goods. She organized a small event at the rescue station, Winter Safety Day and Forgotten Friends Drive. No stage, no flashing banners, no dramatic music, just folding tables, coffee urns, maps of dangerous ridge routes, a donation corner for senior working dogs, and a hand-painted sign that read, "Some souls need more time to come home." By noon, the old road salt barn had filled with people, not too many to become a crowd, but enough for Callum's shoulders to tighten. There were farmers in wool caps, parents with children bundled in bright coats, church ladies carrying casseroles, rescue volunteers, checking gear displays, and townspeople who had once driven past Eldon Pratt's kennel without thinking twice. Now they carried blankets, bags of senior dog, food, joint supplements, old towels, and envelopes with folded bills. Dr. Miriam Vale stood near the donation table, calm as a candle in a draft. At 46, she carried authority with quiet hands and eyes, the color of honey warmed by firelight. Her dark curls were tied low, and her moss-green coat hung open over a gray sweater. She did not speak loudly, but people leaned closer when she talked. "Compassion is a beginning," Miriam told a small group gathered around her. "It is not the whole promise. A senior dog needs patience after the first emotional day, vet care, routine space, food measured properly. Time, love that panics can become another kind of pressure." A woman in the group wiped her eyes and nodded, as if Miriam had spoken about more than dogs. Across the room, Eldon Pratt unloaded a bag of food from his truck. Eldon looked different now, not cleaner exactly, but more careful. His brown canvas coat was still stained, his old cap still faded, his gray-blonde mustache still poorly behaved. Yet he moved without the brisk salesman's air he once wore at the kennel. When someone joked that he had sold the most famous dog in Maine for $100, Eldon did not defend himself. He only glanced toward Briggs and said, "Maybe he had to leave my place before I could see him right." Nobody laughed after that. The three people rescued from Old Lark Ridge arrived shortly after 1. Elias Venn came first, leaning on a cane, his thin body wrapped in a heavy mustard parka. His white hair stuck out from beneath the knit cap, and his wind-brown face still looked pale around the mouth. But his eyes were clear. In one gloved hand, he carried a piece of old metal signage recovered from the ridge, a faded weather route marker with 3 diagonal slashes beneath a circle. Mara Collins walked beside him, tall and composed. Her black braid tucked beneath a wool hat, copper. Brown skin still marked by healing windburn. She moved like someone who had looked into the mouth of winter and decided not to make a spectacle of surviving it. Owen Pike followed a step behind, lanky and red, haired, his freckles standing out against skin, still too pale from what the cold had taken from him. He wore a borrowed scarf wrapped twice around his neck and held a small notebook in both hands, like a fragile relic. When Owen saw Briggs, he stopped. The station quieted in that way rooms sometimes do when everyone senses a moment before it fully arrives. Briggs was lying near Callum's left boot. His yellow and black coat had grown fuller, though silver still marked his muzzle like frost that never melted. One ear stood upright. The bent one rested at its old stubborn angle. He looked at Owen without moving. Owen crossed the room slowly. I don't remember everything, he said, voice thin but steady. In the hollow. I remember cold. I remember Mara talking. I remember thinking I'd never be warm again. He knelt, careful not to crowd Briggs. And then there was something blocking the wind. Briggs watched him. Owen gave a small, shaken laugh. I thought it was an angel. Then I woke up and someone told me it had arthritis. Tobin from behind the coffee table muttered, Heaven's customer service has gone downhill. The room broke into laughter, gentle, grateful, badly needed. Even Owen laughed, wiping at one eye with the heel of his hand. That laughter did something the speeches could not. It let the room breathe. Elias stepped forward next and placed the old metal marker on the table near the maps. His hand trembled as he touched it. We used to mark routes by hand, he said. Before better towers, before drones. Before we thought progress meant we could forget the old ways. That dog remembered what we buried. He looked at Callum. And maybe some people too. Callum looked away first. Then Tobin cleared his throat. That was never a good sign. All right, he said, loud enough for the room. Since everybody's feeling sentimental and nobody's run out of coffee yet, I've got an announcement. Callum turned slowly. Tobin smiled around a peppermint. No, I haven't said anything. I know your face. My face is noble and misunderstood. Your face is a warrant. Willa, standing near the donation table, tried very hard not to laugh. Tobin ignored him. Cedar Hollow Rescue is starting a winter safety en route. Reading program, public sessions once a month. Volunteer training twice a month. Responsible adoption information for senior working dogs in partnership with Dr. Vale and, God help us, Eldon Pratt. Eldon lifted one hand awkwardly. Tobin continued. Mercer will advise on cold weather field judgment. Callum's chest tightened. The room turned toward him, not with the hunger of spectators, but with hope. That was worse. Hope asked something. Hope left fingerprints. Every old instinct in Callum told him to find the nearest door. Then Briggs rose, slowly. No drama, no bark, no command. The old shepherd stood and stepped to Callum's left side, close enough that his shoulder touched the leg of Callum's jeans. Not leaning hard, not trapping him. Only there. A warm weight, a living anchor. Callum looked down. Briggs did not look up at him. He faced the room, calm and solemn, as if standing beside Callum was not comfort but duty, and Callum understood something so simple it nearly undid him. Courage was not always running toward gunfire, storms, or broken ridges. Sometimes courage was staying in the room. He stepped forward. The room quieted. Callum did not make a speech the way people expected. He had no taste for polished words. His voice was low, roughened by disuse and winter air. People misread value, he said. We see age and call it burden. We see scars and call it damage. We see silence and think there's nothing left inside. He looked toward Briggs. Sometimes the ones who have been left behind remember the way better than the rest of us. Willa's eyes filled. Callum shifted his gaze to her, and something almost like humor touched his mouth. My sister said I needed a dog. Willa folded her arms, already suspicious. She was wrong. A ripple moved through the room. Callum rested one hand on Briggs's back. The old dog stood still beneath it. I needed a reason to open the door. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of coffee steam, old grief, winter light, and the strange mercy of being allowed to begin again while still carrying what had ended. Later, when the event was over and the station had emptied, Callum and Briggs drove home under a fading sky. The sun was sinking behind the pines, pouring pale gold across the snow. The cabin waited at the edge of the woods, small and smoke, warmed, with tracks leading to the porch, and a porch light Willa had bullied him into leaving on inside. Callum fed Briggs, hung his green jacket by the door, and started the fire. There were 2 bowls now near the stove, a blanket by the chair, a brush on the shelf, dog hair on the floorboards, signs of life everywhere. Callum poured coffee and forgot to drink it. Briggs settled beside his boots, silver muzzle resting on his paws, eyes half closed, ears still listening. Outside, winter moved through the trees. It would always be there. The cold, the dark, the old roads buried under snow. But Callum no longer believed he stood before it alone. He had not been saved by thunder or a blazing revelation. He had been saved by a sister who would not stop knocking, a veterinarian who knew patience was holy work, a town willing to be ashamed and then do better, and an old German shepherd who remembered a road after everyone else had let it disappear. Briggs had not taught Callum to forget the war. He had taught him that after the war, there were still doors to open, still people to guide home, still fires worth tending, and sometimes when God sent hope into the world, it did not arrive with wings. Sometimes it came on 4 tired paws, with snow on its muzzle, and waited quietly by the door until a man remembered how to live. Sometimes, a miracle does not arrive with thunder, shining lights, or a voice from the clouds. Sometimes, God sends it quietly. He sends it through a sister who refuses to stop knocking on a lonely door, through a town that finally learns to look again, through a wounded old dog with snow on his muzzle, still carrying a map of loyalty in his heart, through one small act of mercy that seems ordinary at first, but slowly changes everything it touches. Callum thought he was giving Briggs a home. But in truth, Briggs was leading Callum back to one, and maybe that is how grace often works in our own lives. We may walk past someone who looks too old, too broken, too silent, or too difficult to love. We may judge too quickly, just like the people at the kennel did. But God has a way of hiding great purpose inside the souls the world overlooks. The tired neighbor who rarely speaks, the abandoned animal waiting behind a fence, the family member who seems impossible to reach, the stranger who needs patience more than advice, even the wounded part of ourselves we have tried to lock away. Every day, there may be a door waiting for us to open. A kind word, a patient hand, a second chance, or one brave decision can become the miracle someone else has been praying for. And sometimes, while we are trying to rescue another life, God is quietly rescuing us too. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment and tell us where you are watching from, and whether you believe God can still work through animals, strangers, and second chances. And if you love stories of loyalty, healing, faith, and the unbreakable bond between a Navy SEAL and a German Shepherd, please subscribe to the channel and join us for the next story. May God bless you, protect your family, warm your home, and remind you that no soul is ever too forgotten to be found by grace.